Today I'm going to tell you 3 stories. Not the usual ones, not the ones you might expect. These are real lives, but ones that seem straight out of a nightmare or a twisted piece of fiction. 3 people, 3 moments, and a dramatic twist that not only changed their lives, but left millions of others never to be the same again. These stories are a little different. They don't stray far from the darkness we wander every week. Only this time the darkness knows its name. If you like stories like this, let us know. Because in the real world, sometimes the strangest things aren't in the movies, they're in forgotten history. But before we get to those scary turns, if you're a fan of weird, dark, and mysterious things, told in a storybook style, then you're in the right place. We post videos every week, and if you want to make sure you don't miss a single chill, put glitter in someone's air vent, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Why? Because chaos always starts with something small. September 1954. The fog was thick outside the frosted windows. A 14-year-old boy, Rich, pale as candle wax, trudged slowly down the long corridor of a children's hospital in northern England. His breathing, wet, heavy. Each breath seemed to be drawn from the abyss, the sound of tuberculosis gnawing at him from within. The other children moved with him, none speaking, just silent steps, heads bowed, as if each carried a silent sentence. And the corridor, longer than usual, seeming to widen step by step, swallowing them up. The ceiling was silent. The walls were cold. The fluorescent lights flickered, unsteady. There was something in the air, not the smell of antiseptic, but anticipation. Rich had been in the hospital, not for the first time. When he was 6, a vicious infection had dragged him to his death. Coma. A year of lying motionless, pale, emaciated as a tick. Now the doctors said he would probably live here, among the lifeless white walls and the cold hum of machines, for 2 more years. 2 years. Like a sentence. Outside, life went on. Cars drove by. People laughed. The world turned. No one missed him. No one knew he was fading away, day by day, hour by hour. Rich felt himself fading, not dying, just fading, like a ghost trapped in a hospital, unseen, unheard, uncalled for. The darkness in that room with the lights on kept getting longer. Every time he closed his eyes, he feared he would never open them again. Or worse, open your eyes, and it's still here. Hospital classrooms were never meant to be places for learning. Not really. Weaving baskets, gluing buttons to cardboard. Lessons fell from memory as soon as the bell rang. No one cared. No one was around long enough to remember. But today, something was wrong. The room was too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. A strange smell, metal or bleach, I couldn't tell, hung in the air. In the middle of the room, the familiar plastic tables and chairs were gone. Musical instruments, really, unusually many. A chipped cello leaned against the corner. A rusty trumpet lay on a table, as if it had just been dug up from the ground. A piano without a lid, its black and white keys like fangs. And in the center, like a creature that had been dormant for decades, was a dusty drum set. The drum skin was green with mold, the iron rims rusted with the color of time. It felt like if you struck them, the sound would not be music, but something else. Sitting behind the drums was a stranger. No blouse, no smile, unblinking eyes. The new teacher, they said. No one knew where he came from. No one remembered seeing him walk in. And then he struck the first beat. Not a beat of life, but a beat that awakened something long dead. Rich didn't ask. He demanded. His voice cut through the air like a dull knife, not loud, but cold and determined. The class fell silent. The strange teacher said nothing, just nodded. Slowly, as if he had been waiting for this for a long time, Rich stepped forward. His hands were shaking not from fear, but from something calling. He picked up the drumsticks, his small hands barely able to bear the weight. Cold, heavy, like metal buried deep underground for years. He sat down. He took a breath and played. Bad, clumsy, unsteady. Not music, just the chaotic pounding of a soul thrashing in a cage. The class played too. They created a riot of sound, scratchy, offbeat, meaningless. But then, as Rich's drumsticks struck again and again, something stirred, not in the room, but beneath it. A faint vibration like a muffled roar echoed from beneath the floor tiles. The air grew thick. The lights flickered. The clock stopped. Something woke. Not the music, not the inspiration, but an entity old, deep, and hungry. But Rich wasn't done. He needed more. The drums that day kept ringing in his head, like the heartbeat of a shapeless creature, still waiting for him to tap to open his eyes. He wandered alone through the empty hallways, where the fluorescent lights flickered like the last breaths of an old soul. Then he saw them, 2 long knitting needles, forgotten in a closet that no one opened anymore. Old, bent, cold as bone. And to Rich, they weren't knitting needles. They were drumsticks. From that night, when the nurse's footsteps had died down the hallway, when the heart monitor was just the monotonous beat of life waiting to fade, Rich began to play. Not on the drums, on the walls, on the iron bed, on the tubes that snaked like veins in a dying body. Each beat, each knock echoed through the night like a code sent somewhere far away, like a summoning. He didn't know who to call, but something was approaching. The echoes bouncing off the walls weren't like normal echoes. They answered, vibrated, long, and something knocked back from within the walls, as if the hospital was breathing with him, or he was waking it up. A year and a half, Rich was trapped in the white concrete shell of a hospital. Tuberculosis, a silent beast, gnawing at the space in his chest. Every breath was a scratch. Every cough was a crack. His body weakened. His voice grew hoarse. But one thing never stopped, the beat. Even in his fever or in his sweaty, broken dreams, Rich kept tapping, knitting needles on the bedpost, fingers on the tiles. His eyes were glazed, but his hands kept tapping, mesmerized, as if the beat itself was keeping him alive. The entire ward smelled of bleach and rotting flesh. Patients disappeared one by one, wheeled away, shrouded in white, forgotten. Death lurked like smoke, creeping into his lungs through his eyes. But in the land of silence and decay, the drums live on. Not music, no longer a hobby, but a second heartbeat, not human. It doesn't just ring in Rich's ears. It begins to ring in the walls, in the sewers, in the blood. And the hospital listens. In 1955, when Rich was 16, they told him he was cured. After a year and a half of companionship with death, after nights of knocking into the darkness, as if begging for life, they let him walk out of the hospital, a free boy. But the world outside did not welcome him with open arms. It was colder than the hospital corridors. His family, destitute, dirt poor. Home was a damp, rotting wooden room. Not enough room for hope. School. No money. No time. No one waiting for him. He went to work. The factory was noisy. Oil. Steel. The machines screamed like the screams of crushed souls. Every day was a copy of the day before. Dull. Heavy. Invisible. But at night, the drums were still there. Not real drums. No wooden mallets. Just him, his calloused hands, and anything that made a sound when struck a dining table, a steel pipe, a cement wall. The old beat returned, no longer saving him, no longer keeping him alive. Now it only haunted him like a ghost that could not leave the person who called it. A curse in sound. Unstoppable. Unstoppable. And sometimes when he tapped into the darkness, something tapped back. Then on a cold Christmas Eve in 1956, the man Rich had never called father, gave him a present. No warning, no smile, just a curt nod and averted eyes. He opened it and stopped breathing. A drum set, real, not rusted, not cracked, not growing out of the darkness like the ones in hospitals, glittering under the yellow light. Unbelievable! Rich touched it with trembling hands, as if he were about to defile something sacred. The fingers that had been familiar with knitting needles and plumbing now touched the skin of the drum, as if touching the flesh of the past, of nights spent beating in dead silence. The stepfather didn't say why, but Rich knew. The overtime, the meals given away, sleeps cut short by the roar of the machine, all for the boy who died and came back, carrying something that never left. Now it had a real drum to live in. And that night when Rich played the first beat, the room shook, not with sound, but with recognition. Something deep inside him smiled. The boy who used to tap on hospital pipes, now the one who lights the drunken nights. Rich is no longer the silent shadow lying on a hospital bed. Now he sits behind a real drum kit, on rickety stages covered in sweat and cigarette smoke, dirty bars, dark clubs, endless nights with songs that ring out like calls from nowhere. The later it gets, the deeper the drums. The drunker the audience, the quieter it gets. No one laughs. No one shouts. They listen with their ears, with their skin, with their bones. And then they start whispering. That guy, the guy who was in the hospital for a year, the guy who was sick and couldn't die. He beats the drums like he has something else inside him. Not talent, not practice. It's possession. When Rich played, his body seemed to jerk to the beat, unnatural, unsteady. His eyes were wide and lifeless. His mouth was moving inaudibly, and there was something about the music he made. It was not of this world. It did not evoke emotion. It opened doors. Then one day, the knocking came again, not from inside the hospital walls, not from the darkness he had called out with his drum beat, but from outside the door. A band. They needed a new drummer. They said the old one wasn't good enough. No one asked why. Just knew someone had been replaced. Rich looked at them. No words. Just nodded. And in that moment, he was gone. No longer Rich, the boy who had tapped on the oxygen tube to stay conscious. No longer the teenager huddled in the hospital, tapping on the wall to keep death from crawling into his heart. The ghost of the hospital was gone, replaced by a name, a new shell, a new voice. Ringo Starr. No one remembered Rich anymore. No one spoke. It was as if he had never existed. But every time Ringo sat behind the drums, and the drumsticks came down for the first time, the shadow of the old hospital would pass behind the lights, because what he played still carried echoes from the place where he died. A quiet summer afternoon, July 9, 2001. Yellow sunlight filtered through the dense foliage, scattering slivers of light onto the dense forest floor near Yellowstone National Park. There was no wind, no birdsong, only a silence that hung like an invisible blanket over the forest. Cody Clausen, a 13-year-old boy, left his Boy Scout camp. He had only a small bag with a few simple camping items in it. It was a simple task, running to his father's truck to get more supplies. An errand that would only take a few minutes. Just a few minutes. But the forest doesn't measure time like humans. And it doesn't forget. Cody stepped into the dark trees as if he were being sucked into another world, where all sound was swallowed up, where the compass not only spun, but lost its mind. The sky above faded away, giving way to branches that intertwined like claws. His feet pressed against the soft, damp moss. Each step seemed to sink deeper into something that wasn't earth. He looked back. Where was the camp? There was no trace, just the forest, a wall of forest, and the silence, so heavy that he wanted to scream, but even that scream, it seemed, would be strangled before it could escape his throat. And then, Cody was gone. Cody walked, his gaze unfocused, letting his thoughts drift like clouds over the forest. He thought about the evening by the fire. What would he tell? A funny story? A little adventure? He smiled quietly. But then he stopped. Where was the road? The weeds were taller. The path had disappeared as if it had never existed. The trees around him were taller, thicker, unfamiliar, not the ones he had passed before. No tracks, no footprints, just forest, forest, forest. And the silence. A false silence. No cicadas, no birds. Not even the leaves moved, as if the forest were holding its breath, waiting. Cody turned around unconsciously. His heart began to beat faster. Not out of fear, not quite. Out of confusion. The feeling that someone or something was watching right behind him. He hadn't strayed from the path. He had been uprooted from that world. It was as if he had crossed a thin line between what was real and what wasn't, between the familiar and the unnamed nightmare. The shadows of the trees seemed to lengthen, bend. The air was thick, the smell of damp earth heavy. And somewhere far away, a branch snapped softly, then stopped. Cody wasn't sure where he was anymore. All he knew was he wasn't safe. Cody tried to turn back, taking what he thought was the old path. But everything was blurry. The trees were blurred as if they were one, no longer distinguishable from the path, from the way back. They twisted, morphed, as if whispering something to each other, in a language only the forest understood. The air suddenly felt colder, a strange cold, not from the weather but from within, from the earth, from the wind, from the gaps that watched him from the darkness. There were no footsteps behind him, no familiar voices calling from the camp. There was only the wind. The wind whistled softly through the branches, but the sound was no longer natural. It was more like a whisper, a mixture of broken, distorted sentences, as if the forest were talking about him, watching him, and shifting. It wasn't that Cody was lost. It was that the path was changing every second, leading him deeper into uncharted territory, uncharted forest lands, where no one ever returned. Time passed, hour by hour, then another. Cody screamed into the woods, his throat raw, his voice hoarse. Help! No one answered. Only a cold echo answered a repetition of his own scream, but distorted, alien, as if the woods were mocking him. As if Cody's voice was no longer his own. The sky began to change color, from blue-gray to deep purple, then black. Huge clouds were rolling in from the distance, not hovering, but crawling like giant black creatures, streaming across the sky with hidden teeth. The wind picked up, cold, cutting through flesh like thin blades. The storm was coming, and Cody was still alone. No shelter, no direction. No one knew where he was. The sky hissed a deep, empty sound, like the sigh of an old forest before swallowing a lost soul. Cody knelt, his hands shaking as he searched the bag slung over his shoulder. A true Boy Scout, he told himself, knows how to set up camp, make a fire, and make it through the night. But the bag was empty. No food, no lighter, just a little water enough to wet his lips, no more. He looked down at the useless things in his hands, feeling like he was looking at a lie. The bag, which had been filled with hope at first, had become a symbol of a fatal mistake. The forest had lured him in with false hope. The forest had drawn him in, gently, as if to comfort him, and then abandoned him. The wind howled again, as if to mock his innocence. The trees around him leaned, murmuring like silent witnesses to an ancient ritual where those who strayed never returned. And Cody began to understand. This was more than a forest. It was an entity, a trap, a closing mouth. And then the sky split. Not just thunder, but a scream that tore through the sky, echoing like the last cry of an eternal being. White light slashed across the forest, revealing a world turned inside out. Rain poured down, hard, cold, iron. Then it turned to hail, each one shot down like a claw, tapping rhythmically on bark, on flesh, on bone. And as everyone panicked, something began to move in the forest. Not big, shapeless, but it wasn't of this world. Cody turned, running headlong into a panic. His small feet kicked up the roots that protruded like bones, sliding through the thick mud. His heart pounded like a ritual drum, beating in his chest as if to announce his location to the entire forest. A bolt of lightning tore across the sky, lighting up in a single breath, and he saw it. A cave. The mouth of the cave was black, gaping like the mouth of some ancient creature. No teeth, no lips, just darkness waiting to swallow. It did not call to him, but it was hungry. Inside the cave, Cody collapsed onto the cold stone floor, soaked, numb, exhausted. Outside, the forest roared in fury. Thunder echoed like the screams of restless souls. But inside, there was silence, a thick, suffocating silence. No pounding rain, no howling wind, nothing. Too quiet. So quiet that Cody could hear his own heartbeat, and then other sounds, faint, distant, like breathing. Not his own. Something was holding its breath with him. He tried to keep his eyes open, but his eyelids felt heavy as stone. His body no longer obeyed. Every sensation slipped like water through his fingers. And then nothingness. His body collapsed completely, sinking into the pitch-black darkness where there was no dreaming, no waking, only a silent presence watching, waiting. Cody was no longer alone. Not anymore. Morning. The storm had passed silently, leaving the land soaked and distorted, as if the forest had just gone through a seizure. A faint light filtered through the trembling trees, but it carried no warmth. Just a lost light, a light not meant for lost people. Cody opened his eyes, but the forest was no longer asleep. It was watching. It was strangely quiet. Not a bird, not a wind, as if the whole forest were holding its breath, watching him from behind every tree, every rock, every shadow. And then, thump, 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 from a distance came the familiar sound, but now it sounded like a drumbeat in a graveyard. The helicopter. Cody jumped to his feet slipping on the wet stone. He dashed out of the cave like a man fleeing a nightmare that had not yet ended, his eyes watering, his skin pale. The wind blew, carrying a musty smell, and another smell. He looked up, saw the dull sun through the clouds. Lips pressed together, he unbuckled his belt, caught the light, shook it. A silvery flash shot up into the sky. A faint signal. A plea. See me. But the forest did not speak. It listened. The helicopter hovered above the forest canopy, its blades tearing through the air with a harsh, deafening noise like a machine that didn't belong there. Then it slowly lowered, its black underbelly drifting through the morning mist like a mechanical beast stalking its prey. The door opened. A man stepped out, his footsteps heavy as if he had just woken from a bad dream. He said nothing. He just turned to look at Cody and smiled. Not a warm smile, not a cold one, just empty, as if the smile was memorized, repeated, like someone trying to imitate the way humans behaved. Then the voice spoke even, clear, as if it were coming from a loudspeaker. Good morning. Cody paused, his palms clenched. Something was wrong. A lingering feeling he couldn't name, like when you walk into a familiar room and the objects have been moved invisibly. And then he realized, that face familiar. Not because he'd seen the man before, but because it was his own face. Just bigger, just a little off. The man stood there, the morning light illuminating his face like a warped spotlight. He was no ordinary pilot. Cody squinted, his heart pounding, not with fear but with recognition. He had seen this face before, on screens, in movies. The man with the whip, adventuring in ancient catacombs. The spaceship smuggler, shooting through the stars. An icon. A hero. Harrison Ford. He stammered, his throat dry. You are. The man just nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips as if it went without saying. But something was wrong. It wasn't the name. It was the way he was here, in the middle of the woods, in the storm, as if he had come from Cody's own imagination. He was so tired, so hungry, so desperate, and maybe dreaming. Or worse. This wasn't Harrison Ford. It was a shape the forest had created, an imaginary hero, pulled from the memory of a boy dying of cold, of fear, of darkness. A face he could trust, a hand he could hold, and never turn back. Cody's father thought he would ask to go home. After all, who wouldn't want to leave? But Cody just looked at him, eyes deeper than his 13 years, and shook his head silently. No, he said, his voice suspiciously calm. I want to go back to camp. I have something to tell. He nodded, relieved. But he didn't see. The woods behind Cody seemed to stir slightly, not from the wind, but from memories. He didn't see the thin mist swirling around Cody's heels, as if it hadn't yet completely let him go. And Cody, when he turned away, didn't smile. He didn't need it. The story inside him wasn't for entertaining by the fire. It was a warning. It was a mark. It was something the woods had whispered into his ear deep in the night, and now he carried it with him, like a messenger. A story that only one man lived to tell, and a story that the forest will never forget. 11 a.m., Sunday, October 20, 1991. Will Wright woke to a dim light and the strange smell of smoke that filled his lungs. He couldn't know that in a few minutes flames would roar down the hillside, consuming his house, his past, and his old life. No sirens, no time to pack, only time cracked, and the flames crept forward like an ancient spirit, reclaiming everything. This is the story of the fire that burned his world and inadvertently ignited the light of a legend. A fire that destroyed but also gave birth. From the ashes, from the burned memories, other life emerged in the form of small people, living, loving, losing, and rebuilding. Will woke up next to his wife in their modest home in Oakland, California. The air was quiet, but not peaceful. It was like the silence before a storm. He took a deep breath. The smell of smoke filled his lungs, not overwhelming but haunting like a vague memory of a forgotten nightmare. A strange feeling ran down his spine. He walked to the window. Beyond the silent hills, a column of thick black smoke curled into the sky like a crack in the blue sky. Wildfires were not uncommon in this part of the country, but this time, something was wrong. It wasn't just the fire. It was a warning. An ominous presence was rising. Will picked up the phone and dialed 911. The operator's voice came through the phone, dumb, mechanical. Just a small fire on the hillside. It's under control. Nothing to worry about, sir. The reassurance fell on him like a lullaby. He nodded, hung up, and tried to convince himself that he was being too sensitive. He returned to his daily routine, making coffee, checking his schedule, stepping into the shower. Warm water ran over his skin. White shaving foam clumped on his chin. A moment that seemed normal, familiar. But then he paused. Something was wrong. The light coming through the opaque bathroom window was now a sickly yellow, almost burnt orange, a light that shouldn't be there in the morning. He paused, sensing the smell of smoke now thicker, more intense, as if it were seeping in from the smallest cracks in the house. No longer a warning but a cruel reminder. Something was coming closer. Will stepped outside, his bare feet on the cold floor. The air was thick now, as stifling as breathing through a sheet of wet cloth soaked in burning tar. And then he saw fire. The flames had crossed the hills, slithering down like a wild beast that could not be restrained. The flames rose, twisting in the wind as if mocking man's slowness. It was no longer a fire, it was a hunger. All habits were gone. The cup of coffee on the table felt foreign, meaningless. He grabbed the phone, dialed 911 again, his voice choked and trembling. The fire is coming. Fast. It's coming toward my house, can you hear it? A pause. Then the operator spoke slowly, doubtfully. Sir, we haven't received any extended warnings from the fire department. The fire is under control. Will stood still. A wind whistled past, carrying swirling ash like the ruins of houses that had been swallowed. He didn't answer. He couldn't. In that moment, he understood they didn't believe him, and they wouldn't make it in time. His house, his wife, the whole neighborhood was gone. Will and his wife hurried to gather their belongings, hands shaking, heads reeling from the faint roar of the distant fire. The empty backpack was stuffed in a haze medicine, papers, a few bottles of water, a phone, a wallet. There was no time to choose. It was escape or disappear. Outside, the sky had turned to burnt copper, as if the earth were looking into a mirror and seeing itself decay. Ashes fell like black rain. The end of the road was no longer visible. Neighbors poured out of their homes like lost ghosts, panic, screaming, cramming loved ones and pets into cars. Car doors slammed. Horns. Crying. Flames roared from the horizon. Will grabbed his wife's hand, pulling her toward the car. But then he stopped. His heart was clenched. The house at the end of the street. An old couple lived quietly watching over their 2-year-old grandchild while his parents were away. No car. No sound. No one saw them run out. Will turned, ignoring his wife's call. He dashed through the smoke, each step as if wading through boiling oil. His eyes stung, but the front door of their house was still faintly visible as in a nightmare. Knock, knock, knock. He pounded on the door, the sound sucked into the thick smoke. Open the door. Go. The fire is coming. The door opened 2 old faces, terrified, speechless. The child in their arms was crying, coughing from the smoke. Without a word of explanation, Will caught the child, his arms burning from the heat. But he did not let go. The old man held onto her, staggering behind him. The car was waiting, the door wide open like the last cave entrance before the abyss. His wife had already turned on the air conditioning, her eyes fixed on the blazing hill that was charging towards them like an eyeless monster. Will shoved them all into the car, his hands shaking. Behind him, the hissing of the flames was audible to his naked ears. There was no time. They raced down the street as if they were running from death itself. The car shook, the tires grinding through the ash that lay thick on the pavement like bone dust. Behind, the wind whipped at the car, carrying with it waves of red embers that burned like flayed skin. They raced through the air silently, precisely and mercilessly. The fire didn't just spread, it roared. It swept through the narrow alleys between houses, like wild animals left too long without food, devouring everything in its path. Will tightened his grip on the wheel, his heart pounding like a drum. A curve, then a slope. Flames flashed in the rearview mirror, getting closer by the second, burning away every trace of life they had known. They were out. Barely. Just a few minutes or a few breaths. But not everyone was so lucky. Through the smoke, they saw the brake lights stop abruptly in the middle of the road. An abandoned car. The door was open. No one was inside. No call. No trace. Only ashes drifting in the wind, as gentle as a final farewell. A week later, under police escort, Will returned. No more neighborhood, no more homes, just scorched earth, blackened coal, and a suffocating silence. The once bustling driveway was now a creek of cold ash, and each step he took sank into a layer of dust as thin as crushed bone. Chimneys stood amid the rubble, bare as nameless tombstones. Where laughter had once sounded, now the wind blew through rubble cold and lifeless. The car that had been parked in front of the house was a twisted shape, aluminum melted into puddles, glass melted into sand. No more roof, no more walls, just a twisted iron frame, like an open coffin. Will stood still, eyes dry. There were no more tears, for there was nothing left to lose. This had been his world. Now it was the ashes of memory. Amidst the sea of ash, Will fell to his knees, as empty as the ground beneath him. Everything had burned away too quickly to understand, too slowly to forget. But then he saw a tiny movement so tiny in the dust. A line of ants. They were crawling through the cracks of the scorched earth, dragging debris, charred leaves, dead insects. No panic, no lamentation. They were starting again. Grains of sand, tunnels, clumps of earth were piled up in the ashes, as if the apocalypse had never happened. Will bowed his head, staring at the tiny life. In the silence, he felt his own heartbeat still there. No one taught ants to despair. They just kept going. And in that moment, amid the ash and the burning carcasses, Will understood. Tragedy does not stop nature. It does not stop life. It does not stop hope. Even in the midst of destruction, something quietly stands up. Will didn't cry. Not for the house. Not for the burned photos. Not for all that had been his old life. He didn't care about what was lost. His family was alive. They were breathing. They could see each other in the light of day. That was enough. But inside him, one thing kept swirling like the wind that never stopped after the fire. The naked, inescapable truth that life is a constant process of breaking and mending. Nothing stands still. Nothing is forever. We can only rebuild, bit by bit. The thought clung to him, not as a comfort but as a command. It pounded in his temples, echoed in his chest, and crept into his sleep. And Will burned with the house, hollow as the burned-out doorframe began again. Not with bricks, not with wood, with a new project, something deeper than the roof, something built not to protect against fire, but to nurture hope. 9 years later, Will released The Sims. Not cement, not the ant game, the one he had obsessed over after the fire, not the insect behavior model, but the pain model and survival. A world where little people don't just live, they suffer, lose, break, and then, little by little, they build new homes, new loves, new lives. The Sims was born not in a lit office, but in the ashes of a vanished neighborhood. Not from logic, but from charred memory, collapsed walls, unheard screams, and a line of ants crawling silently through the rubble, starting over as if nothing had ever been lost. That was the legacy of the fire. Not destruction, but continuity. Not a game, but a whisper of the human instinct to survive. A simulation not of perfection, but of failure, of the abyss, and of the little hand still trying to rebuild the roof in the wind and fire.